Stay tuned for Revolutions Per Minute coming up. It is presented and hosted by the members, the New York City members of the Democratic Socialists of America, and that's coming up, and it's 5 p.m., so stay tuned.
Revolutions Per Minute is a weekly radio show from the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, recorded live at WBAI 99.5 in Brooklyn every Tuesday at 5. RPM is about doing the work to build a democratic socialist future. Every week, hear the latest news, analysis, and organizing experience from the minds and hearts of activists fighting every day in NYC. Join the movement at socialists.nyc.
Yo, what's good, New York? You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute live from the new WBAI studios. We're a socialist radio show and podcast from members of the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. The DSA is the largest socialist organization in the United States, with 56,000 members nationwide, and NYC DSA is its biggest chapter. We are run by our 5,500-plus members and organizers who are working together to build democratic socialism in all 5 boroughs. The New York legislative session kicked off in Albany this month with just one elected Democratic Socialist in office, State Senator Julia Salazar. Today, we're joined by Jabari Brisport to discuss how the NYC DSA squad plans to change that in 2020. Jabari is one of 5 DSA-endorsed candidates running for New York State Senate and Assembly. But Jabari hasn't just been knocking on doors for himself. He's also been talking to New Yorkers about that other Democratic Socialist everyone's been talking about, Bernie Sanders. But first, a live reading of the headlines by me. Governor Cuomo delivered his annual State of the State address, in which he proposed guaranteeing workers 5 days of paid sick leave, suggested banning serial sexual harassers from the subway, and again endorsed legalizing marijuana and implementing automatic voter registration. Notably, he did not discuss his executive budget or how he plans to address the state's $6.1 billion budget deficit. Cuomo commissioned this interesting poster to go with the speech. You can check that out on thethorn.nyc. Despite the state's budget deficit, Governor Cuomo said he does not plan to raise taxes. Mayor de Blasio and budget experts expect this means the governor may soon look to cut services and spending in New York City. Amid continued declines in overall crime, hate crimes in New York City increased 20% in 2019. Driven in part by a significant increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes. NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea announced that the NYPD will start publicly releasing hate crime statistics for the first time. Will they also start monitoring their officers' actions that could easily be characterized as hate crimes? I doubt we'll see that coming soon. And then beyond New York City, I just really wanted to highlight before ending the headlines that there's some really incredible actions that the working class is taking internationally. In a big victory for striking workers in France, Macron has agreed to scrap his widely opposed plan to raise the full benefits retirement age from 62 to 64. Workers in France, though, are not giving up. I mean, they don't need to give up because they're winning, but they're continuing to fight. They know that this is just one demand among many that they want to fight for. And so they are still out on the streets in this incredible general strike that is the largest in France in decades. And also, last week, hundreds of millions of workers in India went on strike, from healthcare workers to all sorts of people within Indian society decided to withhold their labor and stand against Modi's fascistic government. over 250 million workers from multiple sectors participated. This is one of the largest, if not the largest, strike in history. And that is it for our weekly headlines. They are brought to you by The Thorn, an incredible weekly newsletter by NYC DSA Electoral Working Group, covering local politics and radical activism. Subscribe at thethorn.nyc. So we're here with Jabari Brisport, who has been on our show before. You can check that out. I believe that was this past summer with Lee. And Lee was hoping to be here today, but she's doing some really great organizing work. I think she's working to stop a disastrous plan to build a pipeline in Williamsburg. So just want to give a shout out to Lee for all the incredible organizing that she does. So Jabari, why don't you tell us a little about yourself? So maybe our listeners who didn't hear the first interview or just want to hear more about your personal story. Like, what forces pushed you to join the movement for socialism? Why did you join DSA in particular?
Awesome. Well, let me start by saying thanks for having me back on again, Jack.
Thank you so much for coming. I
love this radio show, and also going to shout out to Lee for she's in the movement. She's got to go to make sure we don't do terrible things on the environment. So I appreciate her. And hello to all the listeners who are ready to hear about transformative change in our city, state, and country. Thank you for listening. My name is Jabari Brisport. I'm a proud 32-year-old queer black guy from Brooklyn. I am a public school teacher in Crown Heights. And a little bit about my politics. I actually got into politics through identity politics, which is like counter to the common depiction of socialists. We think we're all class reductionist here. But my first fights were for gay marriage, and moved on into shouting and marching the streets for Black Lives Matter. And it was during the 2016 campaign where I got really interested in electoral politics. I started really thinking about electing people that could fight for the vision I want. And the reason I got into that was because of Bernie Sanders and his campaign. And I was so inspired after him that I was moved to run for office in 2017 for city council. And we ran on a platform of housing justice and racial justice and economic justice. And that campaign was unsuccessful. But you know what? New York has still got a lot of problems we need to fix as socialists. So we are back again, running stronger than ever.
Yeah, and so many of our returning listeners have heard me maybe like highlight this story that our guests are telling, but I think it is just really important to always note like how people got involved in the movement, and it maybe at times it feels repetitive, but that's because the conditions that we're all living under are the same, and everyone has their kind of own unique path. Like you're highlighting your organizing and activism for gay and just queer liberation in general, fighting for that and for Black Lives Matter. And I think those movements were really crucial to getting people involved in a broader movement for socialism that centers those fights but connects them to a bigger picture and a larger struggle to transform society. And just as you were saying, in 2016, people who maybe had been involved in those struggles or had been aware of those struggles, like saw Black Lives Matter protests on Twitter and were like, wow, this is really great. How can I get involved? And then they saw the Sanders campaign. They're like, oh, let's connect these movements on the ground to this electoral project happening at the highest level. But you've also been involved in local politics since then. So I just expand maybe a little bit about the city council race that you ran in 2017. What have you learned from that? And you were also endorsed by DSA in that race. So like, how do you see DSA as a mechanism for building working class power?
Thank you. That's an amazing question because local issues are why I got involved in DSA. Somebody told me to check out a meeting shortly after Trump got elected, and I got there, and the room was just electric, and people were excited about organizing around this project called the Bedford Union Armory. This was a terrible housing deal happening in Crown Heights where they basically wanted to take an old, defunct, empty armory space and convert it into essentially luxury housing and really high-end apartments, and we knew that would gentrify the neighborhood terribly, so we were organizing to kill the deal, which was the rallying cry. And it was great to see DSA partner with local organizations like the Crown Heights Tenants Union and New York Communities for Change and local labor unions, and, really center the unions that were already on the ground, especially since they were, POC and Black and Brown led. And it was really indicative of me of what DSA is, which is an organization that brings together working people and uplifts the communities that are already there in order to fight for our collective liberation.
Yeah, and I think what was so impressive was that, like, DSA was at that moment, and it existed for decades before then, but the organization was transformed in 2015 and 2016 by the Bernie campaign and all the movements like Black Lives Matter, and maybe some, like, people got involved in Standing Rock, and then they joined DSA. Just in that year, you were able to garner 30% of the vote running as a third-party candidate in a city council race, which was the most that anyone had gained in decades, if I'm correct on that. And that was before the AOC and Senator Salazar victories. So, like, how has DSA grown since then? And is it enough for you to win your race and the other races we'll be discussing the other candidates in the NYC DSA squad later. But so, like, how has DSA developed and built power in the years since your run?
Yeah. DSA has really grown and matured. I want to say we've doubled or tripled in size since 2017. We've matured as an organization and just gotten much, much more savvy, especially in electoral politics. I mean, we went from running 2 city council, really scrappy and impressive city council campaigns in 2017 to full-on victories with Julia Salazar's state Senate race in 2018 and AOC's congressional race, and, taking on the entire borough of Queens with Tiffany Caban and, just losing by short, just a very small margin of votes. And now look, here we are in 2020 running a full-on slate of 6 candidates for state and federal offices. It's just extremely, extremely impressive. And I think we have what it takes to bring this on. Although I would say, even though DSA's strong part is the field organizing and how many people we turn out, I would say, people listening, we can't rest on our laurels. Like, it's you that makes this happen. It's your passion and coming out and knocking on doors and believing that this is a movement of many people, not just simple figureheads or simple politicians, but it's about all of us getting out in the streets every day and attending the actions and the rallies and talking to our communities. That's what's going to make us win.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about the individuals. Yeah. It's a collective movement that's building power. It's growing as an organization, not just the organization itself. I would say even the broader socialist movement in New York City and across the country is building power. It's learning from mistakes, or not even just mistakes. When you're in a fight, and I think that you really just hit on this. It's that, like, we have to continue to fight, and you have to take punches, learn from that, and grow. And because the other side not automatically, they already have power. And we're working to fight against that established power. So you can't just be like, oh, we got a few great candidates elected. That's just part of the broader struggle. And so I really want to expand on that in a bit. But just before we do that, who are the other DSA endorsed candidates? Like, what are their names? What districts are they running in? And, like, how are you all working together to change the kind of balance of power within Albany and shift it towards socialists and the working class?
Okay, awesome. So we have right here in Brooklyn, I'm going to start with Phara Souffrant who's running in the neighborhoods that overlap with my district a lot, of Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, Prospect Heights, parts of Crown Heights, parts of Bed-Stuy. She's an amazing housing activist and a union nurse, and we've been even canvassing together, which is great. There's Marcela down in Sunset Park, Red Hook, who's also running for state assembly against Felix Ortiz. She is an incredible housing organizer as well, and we've been collaborating too on strategy and how we're going to really just bring up the voter turnout. Like, Red Hook has really poor voter turnout, which is great for establishment politicians, but we want to make sure people feel involved in the movement. There's also Boris Santos, who is also in Brooklyn with me, and he's an awesome organizer and former chief of staff to Julia Salazar, who's working to unseat Eric Delon. And you have Zohran out in Queens, Astoria, who is just running such an impressive campaign. And I just tell him that every other day, that it brings a smile to my face, seeing his emails and his organizing prowess, and how he's really just going to challenge the establishment and really revolutionize his corner of Queens and the rest of New York State with us. And there's also Samelys Lopez up in the Bronx running in New York 15, who's an incredible organizer and about to help us out at the federal level with DSA's organizing and our platform.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a separate squad in that sense, because Samelys is running for federal and you guys are kind of trying to transform state politics. But obviously it's all connected within the movement together. So I guess to just really kind of maybe not recap, but let our listeners know like what you're trying to build upon, what the movement is trying to work with. Like, what have we been able to accomplish with just Senator Julia Salazar in Albany? And what has DSA learned from both her campaign to get elected as well as her time in office?
Awesome. Julia Salazar needs her own personal shout out because she has been doing such a phenomenal job, phenomenal representing DSA in Albany. And, once you get there, Albany is it's a harsh place, and Julia Salazar has really stood her own and stood true to herself and the movement and to DSA. And I just commend her for how much she's done. And she's pushed the conversation so far over on decriminalizing sex work. She was instrumental to the incredible housing victories we had last year. And she's also pushing forward this bill for good cause eviction, which is something all the slate candidates are behind. And if you're listening and you haven't seen it yet, we actually just released a joint campaign video on good cause eviction, which is has never been done before, to my knowledge, of having multiple candidates do a joint campaign video on a specific issue that is really near and dear to our hearts and will help millions of people in New York State. So I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish with one person, and imagine jumping from one person to 6 socialist politicians who are not only legislators, but people with a bully pulpit and who have movements behind them. I imagine we can radically change things in Albany.
Yeah, and just building off of that, and I think you were just mentioning like one part of your collective vision, which is getting the just cause eviction bill passed. Like, what are you working towards? Like, what's your policy platform, your collective vision for New York, and how significant? And I think you just kind of laid it out a bit, but maybe in a little more detail. How significant would it be to have 6 DSA members in Albany?
I think we can do some incredible work. I mean, it's funny. I think of us as like the exact opposite of the IDC. Like, the IDC was this awful group that was collaborating with Republicans and just dragging the Democratic Party even further to the right. So if you think about how much you hated the IDC, that's how much you'll love the Socialist Squad in Albany, because we are actually of movements and we're of our communities and we're fighting for the working class. So, working together, we can really be fighting to ensure that New York State does have single-payer health care with the New York Health Act, and that we do have a housing guarantee. And we're fighting to uplift our public housing, rehabilitate it, and also expand on socialized housing. We'll be fighting for public banks and fighting for a public energy system. We'll be fighting for decarceration. We have an amazing decarceration platform we're about to release. And, we'll be fighting for fully funding education. That's something near and dear to my heart as a public school teacher. So we're really looking to just wrest New York politics from the hands of capital. And, politicians all the time say, we want to make a New Yorker something that works for all of us. And, people have different meanings when they say that. But like when I say it and when socialists say that, we really mean that, we've taken the profit motive out of housing and education and healthcare and energy, because only by taking that motive out can we actually serve the needs of people and put people over profit.
Yeah, you just explained what is a really impressive and all-encompassing platform, and that would transform the lives of New Yorkers for the better. People would just have so much more freedom in their life, and they would not be kind of drowning in debt and afraid of losing their job and then losing their home and losing everything. This would really empower people. But you also made another crucial point, which is you did identify the enemy, and I think that your point about when some people talk about this is for all, they're trying to cover up the central contradictions in society between capital and labor and the forces of reaction. And we're here in New York City, where Wall Street is here. This is the center of global financial capital, and many corporate headquarters are also located in New York City. So this is the home of the most powerful forces of capital, of the enemy of socialists. But there's also a deep history of working class struggle, and then also like working class institutions. New York City is one of the most unionized places, if not the most unionized place in the country. There's a great community organizations. You have a community radio station like WBAI. So with that in mind, considering how the forces of capital and reaction are aligned together against the socialist movement, how do you plan to push through NYC DSA's agenda? What is your theory of social change, and how important are working class institutions for that fight?
Thank you. Working class institutions are crucial. My theory of social change is making the maximum demand, coupled with elected officials that will support it and mass movements on the ground that will uplift it and amplify it. And it's funny, I think back to my experience with gay marriage too, just going back to that, my initial organizing back when I was a wee young man of 20 years old. And I thought I was being so pragmatic, thinking, well, what if instead of gay marriage, we fought for civil unions? Because it's less controversial and we're more likely to get it. And I'm so ashamed to admit I once too believed in the incrementalist approach to politics. And
many of us did, don't worry.
And it's, even fighting in New York State, we actually lost the first vote. So New York State voted twice on gay marriage. And in 2009, we lost the vote. The Senate said no to it. We lost it. And I was thinking, oh man, see, we should have been going for civil unions. That's proof. But the movement itself said, no, there's no concessions, no half measures. Our demand is full equality. It's gay marriage. It's full equality, 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 equality. And we made the maximum demand over and over again. And in 2011, we won. And then several years later, we're winning nationwide. Because you start at the maximum and you demand it because that the maximum is right. And if you keep on pushing it, eventually history catches up to you.
Yeah, you need that maximum demand, because if you come in ready in saying like, oh, I'm going to negotiate, then you're already giving up. You're giving up so much, and you're kind of like going into a fight with your hand tied behind your back. And so the other side, which is never going to give, they always go full measure, forces of reaction and capital. If they can take everything, they will. So you have to be prepared to fight. And I think, like you were saying, like it's crucial to have the working class institutions, the movement, organized around a concrete, full demand. And that's how you can really build power. So I just want to remind our listeners that you are tuning in to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. To connect with us after the show, you can email us at revolutionsnyc@gmail.com. You can also find us on our website, revolutionsperminute.simplecast.com, or on Twitter at NYCRPM. Today, we're talking with Jabari Brisport about his, as well as the other NYC DSA squad's campaigns for state senate and state assembly. We're going to, later in the episode, we're also going to be talking about how these campaigns relate to the Bernie Sanders movement. But before we do that, we want to get to a clip from a Jabari Brisport fundraiser that happened, I believe, earlier this month in Brooklyn. So let's roll that clip, and then we'll be back with Jabari talking about the importance of racial justice in a socialist movement.
Jabari Brisport, who I met 4 years ago when we were canvassing for Bernie in Newark, New Jersey, and we were. He was holding on to my side view mirror because it was falling off my car. Got a very strong right arm. And Jabari is now running with the support of Democratic Socialists of America, which are very state senate in the 25th district. So I'm going to Jabari, take it away.
So a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Jabari Brisport. I was born in Bed-Stuy. I grew up in Prospect Heights, and I'm a public school math teacher in Crown Heights. All right. And I want to say it's because of Bernie Sanders that I'm a democratic socialist. And that's what democratic socialism is to me. When I hear Medicare for all, I hear care for all. Yeah. I hear we believe in a world where anyone can have the right to health care or education or clean water and clean air, right? And a safe world and a clean environment. Everyone has the right to these things, the right to be loved and respected as human beings and equals. And you're all here tonight because, like we say, not be us. You believe in a New York State and a country and a world where everyone, regardless if they don't even look like you or don't even believe the same things that you do, or maybe they don't even like you because you're a cursed liberal or cursed socialist, you believe they have the right to health care. And you believe their children have the right to education. And you believe they all have the right to clean water. And I'm happy that you're all fighting here with me today. It's people like you that trudge out on a cold, dank January night for a political event, because you all know that there are thousands of people that are homeless in this state. And you know there are millions of people that are uninsured in this country. You know there are billions of people on this planet who are at risk of climate change. You know there are trillions of dollars at stake and another war we're about to launch into in the Middle East. No. But you know what? Because you're here and because you're supporting and because you're fighting and we're fighting together, in about 3 months, I'm going to be successfully on the ballot. In about 6 months, in June, I will be winning my New York State Senate primary. In about 7 months, in July, Bernie Sanders will walk out of the DNC with the Democratic nomination. It's because of people like you coming here and fighting and believing in something that's greater than any one of us individually. 12 months from now, January 2020, I'll be going to Albany and Bernie Sanders will be going to the White House.
And as you could just hear from that clip, Jabari is not only great on the radio, he's also great giving speeches at fundraisers. I'm hyped up. I'm ready to go knock on some doors, do some text banking, give some money, especially if I had more of that. But so the weekend of that fundraiser in Brooklyn, you also had a racial justice angry hour. Attended an anti-war protest at Senator Schumer's house and had multiple canvases. What's your average week like right now, and what's your organizing strategy to win your state Senate race?
Thanks, Jack. My weeks are wild right now. I'm still a full-time public school teacher with all that involves. So during the day, I'm there. I'm at my school ensuring the students in my community have the best possible education I can give them, because truly, I know it's cliche, but the children are the future, and they are going to be the ones to fix, the stuff that capitalism has wrought on this world. But once the school day ends, it's down to the campaign. So out in the community organizing, I'm knocking on doors as much as I can, talking to people. I'm at meetings. I'm attending actions. Like right after this radio show, I'm actually going to Borough Hall to give a statement and talk about this really bad rezoning that's happening in Sunset Park. And the reason we're going to win is because we are bringing new people into the movement. So, for example, at this angry hour we had, for those who don't get it, it was like a spin on having a happy hour. It was like an angry hour because New York is racist and so is America. So this racial justice angry hour, and there was some great, black people and people of color that showed up that I've never seen at a DSA event. So we created a space that was more welcoming and non-traditional that they were more likely to come to. And it was great to talk to them and hear their thoughts and really start to get ideas. The slate's releasing this decarceration platform, which I mentioned briefly earlier, but it's really going to fight against mass incarceration and our battle to end mass incarceration in New York. We're talking about ending cash bail, ending solitary confinement, decriminalizing sex work, and even just transition to ending mass incarceration, just getting back incarceration levels to 1950 levels in New York, where it was literally 1/4 of what it is now. So that's how far we've come from the war on drugs and just the racist criminalization of poverty in this state. And, we're still tweaking it, but get excited for it because it's going to be really good. And capitalism and racism are so intertwined. And like the fight for racial justice is just critical to any fight against capitalism. And it's critical to all of our campaigns.
First of all, I really like the term angry hour. I mean, I think it is particularly works when you're focusing on like the horrors that black and brown communities have just had to suffer under and having a place to express that. But I think it would work for most people leaving their jobs and people just pissed off at the state of our capitalist society. So I think you were really hitting on like how that's kind of shaping your campaign, your vision of racial justice. So like, why is centering racial justice so important for the socialist movement? And how are you reaching out to communities that might not be normally talked to by a candidate for state senate?
Okay, awesome. So let me start with a personal story too of like why racial justice is centered to my theory of change for socialism against capitalism, which is my first moment where I guess I want to say I came out as a socialist was during the 2016 election. I think after the primaries had ended, I was in the shower, which is where I have my best political thoughts.
Don't we all?
I was just thinking to myself about the word capitalism, and I just had this connection that, slavery was capitalism. Like black people were brought here as capital. We were brought here as a product to be sold and traded on a market. And my mind just started spinning on how, well, then sharecropping was also capitalism. And so was redlining was an example of capitalism and housing and racism and how those intersected. The war on drugs, for-profit policing, for-profit prisons, and just looking and thinking about the financial crisis after 2008, how black people were some of the worst to recover after it. And I realized if I've been fighting racism, I've got to fight capitalism. They're so intertwined. I can't really end one without the other. So I think it's critical if we're fighting that. And even like in our platforms, like racial justice, we have a decarceration platform, but racial justice pervades everything in the platform. When we talk about the New York Health Act and single payer for all, like it's black women that are have these high mortality rates, right? Because the hospitals in like lower income communities are not funded with the right staffing ratios. It's black people that are suffering some of the worst eviction rates when we talk about housing. This past summer, when we talk about energy and Con Ed cutting off power, it was in predominantly black and brown communities that they shut off power to. So when we're fighting against capital, we're fighting against racism, and it's so critical. And we're going out and we're partnering with community groups, and one of the other things we're doing are just holding town halls. So both myself and Phara Souffrant Forrest are going to be speaking at a healthcare town hall. In a couple of weeks, we'll be doing a housing town hall and just bringing in people from the community to talk about our vision and how we're fighting racism and capitalism. And we'll be doing these things and just making sure we're reaching out and bringing more and more people in, because this movement only works if we keep on growing it. DSA has grown exponentially, but we need to be 10 times as large. And that comes from bringing in a lot more working people, and especially black people and working people of color, into the movement.
I think you just hit on like so many important points, and like it's a really critical way to think about, I'd say even more than just these issues, but the social relations, the society that we live in, that racism and like the hyper exploitation, and then also the like hyper appropriation of resources of communities of color, and I'd say like especially the black community and then the indigenous community here in the United States, how that has been so essential for both the functioning of the capitalist economic system, but also reinforcing its ideology, where you could divide up the working class against itself, and you have white people think like, oh, I'm better than these other people, so this thing is working for me, even though everyone's getting exploited, but black people are getting exploited that much more. So it's a way of kind of creating these certain hierarchies. So I do want to roll to another clip of a fundraiser that Nancy Romer hosted, who is a member of NYC DSA Eco-Socialists, the People's Climate Movement New York, and part of the PC PSC CUNY Union, who hosted a Jabari and Bernie fundraiser at her home in Brooklyn.
So why did you have this fundraiser for Jabari and Bernie Sanders tonight?
Well, I wanted there to be some cross-fertilization and also to get people engaged in the campaign. You know, what I said earlier, that it's so important that people themselves participate in a group that's very active, but also to project to the world. There's a whole Bernie world out here. You know, it's a social world, it's a political world, it's a friendly world. You can join it only by working, doing the work. You're in the world. And we have to create movements that are good to people, that feed people emotionally and physically, and that welcome them. And that's what, you know, we do with these parties.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people downstairs were mentioning kind of a lot of the dark things that are happening right now. You know, we're on the precipice with another war. Australia is burning. But there did seem to be a lot of hope. And also, you know, fundraisers have been a major kind of thing in the headlines of this presidential thing. You know, how is this different than, you know, Pete Buttigieg's wine cave fundraisers? I
was thinking of saying, you know, welcome to the wine cave. But I didn't. I forgot to say that. But you know, this is a truly grassroots effort. And one of the things that Bernie talks about that I have always believed in a lot of ways, Bernie and I sort of came up very similarly. We came up similarly, not just in terms of the fact that we grew up about 10 blocks apart from each other and similar ethnic background. My parents were a little bit more middle class. They were both college-educated city workers, so we were never wealthy, to say the least, but we never really worried about, you know, poverty. But that politically, I've always been aligned with Bernie for a very long time, many, many decades, and I've heard him speak many times. See the way he interacts with people. He would make a veggie lasagna and a chicken dish and serve, you know, for 200 people. That's how he would campaign. And he would do a 15-minute presentation, and they would ask him questions for an hour and a half. And it was back and forth, and everyone knew him, and he took your questions seriously. He listened well. That's his orientation, is to listen to people, to have an honest interaction, and to grow collectively from the experience. So for me, Bernie, you know, Bernie is a transformative character, and we're in desperate need of transformation. And I guess the other thing that I wanted to say, as an official elder, next month I will be 73, and it's very hard to look in the future and not have a certain level of despair. It's not going to be good. It's going to be very hard. And I think that our generation has to put the effort in now to try to regain some of our own integrity in order to do our share to provide a livable world for future generations. I don't think that we have the right to give up and to say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it, or they'll solve the problem somewhere, or it's too big for me. Bullshit, it's not too big for you. Find something and dig in. My younger son asked me, would I have kids again if I were thinking about having kids now? And the truth is, I wouldn't. But I just didn't have the heart to say that to him. So I said, well, you know, when we were having kids, thinking about having kids, we thought the world would be getting better. But now we know the world is not going to get better. And there are going to be a lot of hard things. And I might have one, but I would definitely never have more than one because of resources, and also because I feel that I'd have to keep doing the work. And it's harder to do the work with kids. So that's a very sad, for those of us who grew up believing that, you know, the world was our oyster, we could do anything we wanted, we could go to school, we could become educated, we could have a certain amount of economic security, all those post-World War II dreams that we had, and for many of us, realities. Our kids are not going to have that. And that's a real failure on our part, and we have to try to make good with what years we have left. So to me, there is something compelling about continuing the work until we can't anymore. We can't do it anymore.
And there's something also very hopeful, too, about doing that work, at the same time for Bernie, and then somebody who's so much younger, like Jabari, who's a millennial, and having those, that history of organizing, but also this, really fresh approach of young people who are like, no, we're not going to just accept the world that you're handing us, and I don't know, for me, that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And somebody said to me, Vilmanette Montgomery, I like her very much. Whoever she endorses, I'll endorse. I say, well, but, she may be working from an old paradigm that worked for her, but maybe it's not going to work in the future. Maybe we need a new paradigm. Maybe we need young, more vibrant, more progressive, further left, not afraid of the establishment candidates to do the work that the movements are needing to be done. And I said, just hear them out. Don't, say, well, I'm just going to go with whoever the old leader endorses. Try to keep your mind a little open on this. But one of the things that I love about being in DSA and being in the climate movement in general is, there are a lot of young people who are doing great work. I never feel like, the world is over because, no one's doing anything. I never feel that way. I always know, and I can name the great people that are doing the really important work. And that's, to me, so important.
You are listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. To connect with us after the show, you can email us at revolutionsnyc@gmail.com. You can find us on our website, revolutionsperminute.simplecast.com, or on Twitter at NYCRPM. Today, we're talking with Jabari Brisport on his run, as well as the broader NYC DSA squad's run for state senate and state assembly in 2020. And we're also talking about how that relates to the broader Democratic Socialist electoral campaign that's happening right now, the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign. And while that clip was rolling, we were talking here in the studio, and engineer Reggie, as always, has great wisdom, bringing up how the corporate media is definitely preparing their onslaught, that the capitalists who own the media do not want a Bernie Sanders presidency. So they're going to do everything they can. They're going to throw everything against the wall, promote these ridiculous rumors as a means to undermine him. And what that shows is obviously don't trust the capitalist-owned media, and also highlights the importance of independent media like WBAI. So if you really want to, build working-class institutions, show your support for the socialist movement, or you just really oppose the people who own all the corporate media and really just the nonsense that's put out there every day, go to WBAI.org, and you could you can go to WBAI.org /BAI buddy and sign up to support this radio station. You can do that in the name of Revolutions Per Minute. Just, slide the tab over there, commit to supporting us on a monthly basis. It's really, really important if you want to fight back against capital and the forces of reaction. So we really appreciate your support. And we want to hear from you soon. So if you want to start calling in at 212-209-2877, again, that's 212-209-2877. Just call in while I'm continuing to talk about with Jabari about these really important issues. So I do want to ask you, since we were just discussing it, why is something like independent media so important? Why is having voices like ours and everything that's kind of emerging across the media ecosystem is one way of describing it. How does that help promote a campaign that is fighting back against capital like yours?
Thank you, Jack. It's super important for independent media to be uplifted and supported in this time because, we need a media that's not beholden to a profit motive, because when they are beholden to a profit motive, they start ginning up controversy out of nowhere or focusing not on the things that'll help working people, but the things that'll get the most views and therefore the most ad dollars. So, that's why we may not see incredible protests or movements being played out on TV, because that doesn't generate views. But, the latest little gossip or whatever about campaigns or this or that might. And so the focus is way off. But independent media can really focus on the issues that are going to help working people and uplift people, and focus on the things that we should be focusing on. So it's super important that we continue to support independent media.
Let's turn back to your campaign as well as Bernie Sanders' campaigns, which are both committed to actually helping working people. So, why is it so important to combine campaigning for both campaigns? And how have you been doing that within your own organizing? And talk about the influence that Bernie, and you've already mentioned this earlier, but maybe just expand on it a little bit, the influence that Bernie has had in your path to becoming a organizer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Bernie Sanders is the reason I am a socialist now. I mean, he was the one that really got me thinking about the term. And then I realized I was a socialist in the shower after Bernie's run in 2016. But it's really great to be collaborating with that campaign, or I guess cross-endorsing or connecting with that campaign on mine, because they're so interwoven. And it's great that the slate is able to really focus on the same fight and issues, but at a local level, because that's what socialism is. It's local. It's the people organizing together with their neighbors and their community to fight against the powers that be, or the institutions that oppress us. So it's great to be knocking on doors and talking to people in public housing about what a homes guarantee would mean, or really getting enough money to fund and rehabilitate NYCHA. And it's great to be talking to people on the streets about a Green New Deal, especially this past weekend where it felt like spring in January.
Yeah, that was a bit strange.
It was super strange. I didn't know whether to be happy about it, or I mean, I talked to my camp. We were out knocking on doors on Saturday. I had to take my jacket off. It was so warm, and I said it's a great day for canvassing, but I am indeed sorry about the climate change. It's so warm on Saturday, but it's great to be talking to people on the streets about what a Green New Deal for New York could be, and locally what it means to uplift and prioritize frontline communities. Like in my camp, my district, Red Hook and Gowanus, are primarily POC districts that have been seriously affected by climate change. Hurricane Sandy wrecked Red Hook, and they did not see the improvements for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of those days where it was like, wow, I guess this is kind of great, but it's also terrible. Yeah, which it's sometimes how I feel when I'm enjoying a lot of things these days. Is the specter of climate change is hanging over us all. So I do want to ask you a couple more questions, but I do want to open up our phone line so that our listeners can also speak with you briefly. So we'd love to hear from you. Please call us at 212-209-2877. Again, that number is 212-209-2877. So, when you've been out canvassing, what has been the response to Bernie so far? And maybe if any of our listeners want to talk about their feelings about Bernie, we're happy to hear that too. And how do the issues that the NYC DSA squad are running on compare to the issues that Bernie is running on?
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So when I talk to people, if they know about Bernie, they like Bernie. That's just by and large, especially we've been talking to a lot of working class people in public housing. If they know about Bernie, they like Bernie. And we have been meeting people, just bringing more people, not even into the campaigns, but just into politics. I think we forget, and even I forget too, of just the masses of people that have no political engagement whatsoever. And that's not anything on them. They are working a bajillion hours a week and they don't have time to follow the news cycle. And I've even been knocking on doors trying to talk about Bernie and hearing people and asking people who they're supporting in the presidential campaign. They ask me who's running. Right. And then I get a chance to talk about Bernie and the movement. And it's exciting for people to hear about a candidate that's fighting for them and fighting for working people on the issues that he is running on, and the squad, which is making sure that everyone can get health care, everyone can get housing, everyone has a fair education, everyone has access to clean water, air, and a good environment.
Yeah, really connecting all of these issues, the problems that people are facing in their life, and say there is actually something that we can do about this. We can build power and we can transform things by like really getting involved and getting organized. So it looks like we have a couple callers into Revolutions Per Minute. We're always excited to hear from our listeners. So you are live on Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI. What's your name and what's your comment or question? Please keep it brief if you can.
Yeah, hi. My name is John. I live in Staten Island.
Hey, John, how's it going?
Pretty good now. You guys are inspirational. I'm a little out of breath. Today with the news, that Bernie and Elizabeth are at each other's throat, I was buying into that crap from CNN and MSNBC, and now I see it for the ploy that it is. And Jabari, is that the candidate's name? And you're incredible. You're inspirational. BAI is critical. It's the only truth out there. And people, please contribute. Help. BAI must survive. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that call, John. We really appreciate your support and those kind words. Do we have another caller? So I guess somebody decided to drop off, but Jabari, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say, John, thank you so much for calling in. Those were really amazing comments to hear, and also just want to plug, DSA has a chapter in Staten Island now, which you should totally check out. We need people like you fighting down in Staten Island. A lot of work to be done down there, and thank you for being part of the movement and for taking the time to listen and calling in. You're the real MVP.
Yeah, we love to hear from callers who are both committed to these politics and also our show can maybe impact them and maybe give them a vision of a better tomorrow and getting out of the the fog of corporate media. And I would just our phone lines are still open if anyone wants to call in. Again, that's 212-209-2877, 212-209-2877. So as you were mentioning before, Jabari, you are a public school teacher. And teachers are the number one profession that donates to Bernie Sanders alongside a lot of service employees at Walmart, Starbucks. So as a public school teacher, why do you think so many teachers are donating to Bernie Sanders?
Thank you so much for asking that question. I know that every day I go into school and I am surrounded by kids that believe transformative change is possible. They have nothing but hope and optimism, and they think that a revolution can happen and that the world that they were born into is not the world they have to stay on. And that I think that affects teachers, that sense of optimism and hope and belief that a better world, a radically different, better world is possible is a big reason why. And also teachers, we just want to make sure the world is good for our students. Climate change is so critical. I want my students to have a planet to live on. We need a Green New Deal, and there's no middle ground on it. To quote Bernie Sanders, there's no middle ground that can be taken on climate change. We either fight it or we don't, and that's something that I think about when I look into my, I teach middle school, so they're almost they're like babies to me. They're 10, 11-year-olds. They're just so bright and so adorable, and I want to make sure that I leave the world better for them than I found it.
Yeah, my fiance is also a public school teacher, and her experience has been really crucial and radicalizing me, just hearing the stories about her students and how also such the hard work that teachers do. It's really, really tough stuff. And I think it just highlights, and it's obviously not just teachers. There are so many jobs where people you're biking around the city to drop off food. That's really hard. That's harder than being in an office or going to the golf course and talking to clients. And yet the pay for those people, for the corporate executives, is so much more than teacher who's producing real social wealth, who's adding real value to society. I believe we have another caller. So I just want to get this caller in before we wrap up, and then we'll give your final comment for the day. So you're live on Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI. What's your name and what's your comment or question? Please keep it brief. We're coming to the end of the show.
Hello?
Hey, how's it going? You're live on WBAI.
Thank you. My name is Bernie. I live in Manhattan, And I just want to make a comment that very few people discuss. We have a tariff war with China. As a result, the Chinese government is purchasing less farm goods from the farmers out in the Midwest, and they're hurting. Now, the president said we're going to be subsidizing the farmers so that they have some money coming in. So my comment is this: isn't this a form of socialism? Because we're using taxpayer dollars, dollars that you and I pay in the form of taxes, to subsidize farmers, and this is not capitalism, this is socialism.
So I would, this is, I'd say, a complicated and maybe a philosophical question that would be hard to explore in the time we have left. But I think it is important to note that the government doing something is not merely socialism. Like, this tariff war is to benefit certain factions of the capitalist class, in particular the pharmaceuticals and the tech companies that want to further penetrate the Chinese market. So this is just typical state policy that is using its funds to maybe put down a class that the Republicans are a section of the working class the Republicans are more dependent upon, but using that really to empower factions of capital. So the government doing something, the government under capitalism actually does a lot. It just tends to do that in benefit of the capitalist class, unless the workers are organizing and making demands. And then when you're redistributing wealth in a really transformative way, something like a socialized healthcare system, that is socialism. I think you could make a real argument that, like, a public education is very socialistic. But I think there's not enough time to really expand upon that. So we are about to wrap up. And before we do, I just want to thank you, first of all, for coming on. You've been a really great guest, and I'm always really happy to have you on here.
Thanks for having me.
But how can people learn more about your campaign? How can they get involved? And then also, how can people get involved in the Bernie campaign?
Awesome. Thank you for asking, Jack. So if you are interested in getting involved, one, you're awesome just for considering it. Again, we need more people in the movement. We're going to be knocking on doors every single day, because that's what it's going to take to win, is talking to as many people as possible and bringing them into the movement for their own liberation, truly. So for my campaign, if you want to get more involved, it's Jabari for StateSenate.com. And again, my name is Jabari with a B as in boy. And if you want to get more involved with the stuff New York City DSA is doing for Bernie, you can see all our events on socialists.nyc. That's socialists.nyc. So plug into both, and this is the political revolution. You are a part of it, and you are necessary, and you are appreciated. So come on through.
I couldn't have asked for a better way to end the show. So thank you again so much for coming on. We're going to keep our listeners updated on this campaign, all the campaigns of the NYC DSA endorsed candidates, as well as the Bernie campaign in the weeks and months to come. So you've been listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM, and we'll be back next week, Tuesday at 5 p.m.